If you're 2-6, you don't want to do this. If you're 1-7, you don't want to do this. But if you are a team that is destined for the fantasy football playoffs, here's how you optimize for it at the wide receiver position in particular. Now, obviously, we already made this video over at running back. We talked about selling the short-term assets, maybe buying in on those guys not producing right now. That could continue to get better as time goes on. Wide receiver, there aren't really the Jordan Masons of the world. There aren't the Chuba Hubbards of the world. These guys that step in and have a large workload, but underlying that, you really don't know if that's just going to be taken from them at the end of the year by another running back coming in later. Wide receiver, typically, it's not so much situational driven in terms of the other wide receivers that they're playing alongside. Now, obviously, situation matters a ton when it comes to the quarterback play, but there aren't like these short-term wide receivers that I think you need to go out there and sell ASAP. Now, of course, there's still the long-term wide receivers that aren't going to be giving you the short-term production that you could potentially go out and send a trade for. Maybe somebody like Mike Evans, who presumably is going to be missing weeks 9, 10, and then you have the bye week in week 11. I mean, if there's an owner in your league that's 3-5 with Evans, you probably should send them an offer if you are a playoff team and you can afford to wait on that elite ceiling that you get for weeks 15, 16, 17. Nico Collins, of course, won't be playing this week, has the week 14 bye. If you notice that the team with Nico Collins is 3-5, 2-6, and you want to go out there and try to purchase them, I definitely think you should if you're a playoff team. Maybe you can throw in like the borderline options like T. Higgins, Deebo Samuel. But really, again, that's more so going to be a strategy over there at running back versus wide receiver. Typically, the guys that have the talent are producing from start to finish, and it's more so matchup driven. So I will go through the best and the worst matchups that you have for these receivers during the fantasy football playoffs. But I do want to point out, of course, that one other thing that you could look at is we know during the playoffs, there are no bye weeks. So your depth is going to matter a lot less. So this is about the time that if you could take a depth wide receiver that pops up off the waiver wire that looks like a strong wide receiver 3 rest of season and send him in a 2-for-1 deal to go get an upgrade for your starting lineup. Your bench is a lot less important during the playoffs. Your depth is a lot less important because we should be through the majority of these bye weeks at this point. Great example of a player like that to potentially see if you could get a decent return for would be a name like Cedric Tillman. Now, of course, Tillman could be a quality bye week fill-in, but underlying that, it's hard to see him turning into a top 20 wide receiver rest of season and really making a difference for a playoff team. Now, of course, if you want to say, Mason, you're a clown, Cedric Tillman's a top 10 wide receiver rest of season, I actually have news for you. If you love Tillman, you can go over to Underdog Fantasy and take the higher than 45.5 receiving yards on Underdog. If you're new to Underdog Fantasy and use promo code FLOCK, you're also going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you're going to be getting a free Jalen Hurts pick, more than less than half a total yard for the game this Sunday night, and a free team review in the live stream we're doing every night. Now, going over to what we have with the best wide receiver schedules, we're going to be starting off with the Chicago Bears, where they get to play Minnesota, Detroit, and Seattle. Now, obviously, Minnesota's had a pretty damn good defense so far this season, but actually wide receivers have been able to score points against them, where in week 15, that matchup against Minnesota, the Vikings have averaged 27 points per game to opposing wide receivers so far this season. The Lions are up at 23.5 points per game. The Seahawks are at about 18.5. So if you're looking at what you have in Chicago, you have no bad matchups, really only great matchups, to be honest. Now, I do want to be a little hesitant here and point out that the Bears are one of these teams that they have to play 3 games within a 10-day stretch. The game against Minnesota is on the 16th. The game against Detroit is on the 22nd, and the game against Seattle is on the 26th. So it is a very awkward little schedule here. I just have no idea how to expect a 10-day stretch with 3 NFL games, how that truly impacts these options on the field. Now, if you were to go out and try to buy a Bears receiver specifically for the playoffs, the last thing I'm going to do is go try to get like Keenan Allen. And that if you're looking at Allen, we are naturally going to assume that, one, he is a little closer to the bye week fill-in rather than the guy that is actually going to make a difference during the playoff stretch. And 2, at the same time, I would assume that Rome Odunze expands his role as the season goes on as the top 10 NFL draft pick, the 22-year-old rookie wide receiver. So I wouldn't want to buy Keenan. If you were buying somebody in Chicago, it would be DJ Moore. Obviously, a few weeks back, coming off a very strong performance, we had DJ Moore as a sell high candidate. Now DJ Moore has been pretty damn bad over the past few weeks where the price tag has come down dramatically. So if you were a playoff team and you wanted to pick up DJ Moore, I'm not going to fault you for it just because there are good matchups, but Rome Odunze could expand his role. Now, our second best schedule will be for the New York Giants here, where you have a matchup against the Ravens, which the Ravens have allowed the most points to opposing wide receivers so far this season. I mean, they are allowing 28.1 points per game to opposing receivers. The Falcons are at 19.2. The Colts are at 18.8. So you have no bad matchups here with this Giants offense. Now, of course, if you're looking at Wan'Dale Robinson, Wan'Dale is a bye-week fill-in. He's not going to be somebody that truly makes a difference for you in the fantasy football playoffs if you're that playoff team. So really the only guy that you would be looking to potentially buy would be Malik Nabers. Now, similar to DJ Moore, back when Malik Nabers was the wide receiver one in fantasy, we had him as the sell-high guy, suggesting to pivot over to Chase or Jefferson or Lamb, of course, with it just being a much worse offense in New York in comparison to those other top alphas. But now, since then, the price tag on Nabers has come down dramatically. So if you wanted to go out there and if you wanted to put out a feeler for Malik, not going to fault you at all with how good the playoff schedule is. Now, our next wide receiver room will be the Green Bay Packers. And this is something that you could throw Jayden Reed onto the list of wide receivers that aren't going to give you short-term production, but could give you long-term upside. Where obviously it seems like Jordan Love has a shot to miss this week. On top of that, if you're looking at what we have with the bye week in week 10, it does appear that Reed's probably not going to be making a difference over the next 2 weeks. Similarly, we had Reed as a sell-high player earlier this season when Reed was coming off of monstrous performances, looking at the underlying volume, saying, hell, when all wide receivers are healthy in Green Bay, it's not like Reed's going out there and ever seeing 10-plus targets. But since then, again, similar to these other guys, his value has gone down dramatically. It is a pretty damn good schedule that you have here. So I would be okay if you wanted to buy Jayden Reed on a playoff team. I'd be a little more excited about it if it was a league in which you start 2 receivers and 2 flex spots. Now, the Dallas Cowboys will have the next best schedule, where if you're looking at Dallas, they go up against Carolina, they go up against the Bucs, and they go up against Eagles. Every single one of these opposing teams is allowing at the very minimum 20 points per game to opposing wide receiver rooms. Lamb's already come out here. He's been dominant. While at the same time, he's through the bye week as well. So you're getting the extra week from CeeDee Lamb in comparison to some of these other receivers. So I have Lamb actually as my wide receiver one rest of season. I know some people may not like that and know we were getting crap about that 2 weeks ago, but we were saying points per game between Lamb and Chase should be comparable. While at the same time, Lamb's through the bye week and Chase isn't. Plus, you have a very good matchup for a slate of games here for Lamb during the playoffs. Next best will be the Panthers, but the thing is, the Panthers wide receiver room is just full of these borderline bye week fill-ins. Like Leggett, Jalen Coker, these aren't guys that I view as upside shots to potentially win you your league in the playoff stretch if you only start 2 wide receivers and a flex. So I'm definitely not telling you to go out there and trade for him, but I think you could pick him up off the waiver wire. Now I have a ridiculous amount of Leggett in underdog drafts, so I'm praying I'm wrong. I'm praying Leggett goes nuclear. And then the last team with a pretty damn good schedule that you have during the playoffs here will be the Steelers, where they get to play the Eagles, then the Ravens, then the Chiefs. The Chiefs is a tough matchup, but the Ravens is a phenomenal one, and Eagles, not too bad. You're at 21 points per game, 28 points per game, and 15.5. Now, with the Steelers, the thing is similar to what we have with a couple other teams here during the fantasy playoffs. You have to play 3 games within a 10-day period. You go up against Philly on the 15th. You go up against Baltimore on the 21st. And then you go up against the Chiefs on Christmas Day. So I would be a little nervous to go after Pickens aggressively, to be honest. Now, the teams with the worst fantasy football schedule for wide receivers, starting with the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Jags are going to have to go up against the Jets, the Raiders, and the Tennessee Titans. Right now, the Jets are allowing 15.1 points per game to opposing receivers. The Raiders are at 16, and the Titans are at the bottom of the league with 13.9. So 3 really tough matchups here. And honestly, this may scare me off of Brian Thomas Jr. just a bit in terms of ranking him as a wide receiver 1 rest of season. Obviously, you have the Christian Kirk injury, which should continue to expand the target share that you're going to get from Brian Thomas Jr. here. This is already an incredible wide receiver talent who's been absolutely crushing as a rookie. That from a dynasty perspective, I mean, it's hard to be quote unquote too high on this guy. It'd be almost impossible. But you have the chest injury that may hold him out this week. We don't know yet. And on top of this, you have the week 12 bye, and you have a brutal stretch of 3 games during the playoffs here. So I do think it's worth it to be a little hesitant to call him a wide receiver 1 right away. Now, New England has a garbage schedule. They play the Cardinals, the Bills, the Chargers. Both the Bills and Chargers are allowing fewer than 15 points per game to opposing receivers. Now, with that being said, nobody in New England mattered anyway. So what am I supposed to tell you? Yo, go sell Demario Douglas. Nobody's going to buy Douglas. Going over to Denver. Denver does not get to play a single team that is allowing 20 points per game or more to opposing wide receivers. You go up against the Colts, the Chargers, and the Bengals. Now, with that being said, nobody here matters either. Very similar to New England. I mean, if you could somehow, some way convince somebody to buy Cortland Sutton from you, you go for it. But Sutton's like the wide receiver 53 in points per game so far this year. Now, the Cincinnati Bengals will be our next team. The Bengals play the Titans, the Browns, and the Broncos. So again, I do want to reiterate that it's maybe a little bit of a tougher spot here, specifically for Chase. And I do have CeeDee Lamb ahead of Chase in my rest of season rankings. And combined with the fact that 3 factors here. 1, you have a great schedule for the Cowboys and CeeDee Lamb during the playoffs. 2, the Bengals and Jamar Chase specifically have a bad schedule. And 3, we get the extra game played from Lamb where Chase does have the week 12 bye. I may go ahead. I may actually pivot, and I'm going to send an offer in the Flock League today. I'm doing it. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to offer Chase for CeeDee Lamb. It's just tough because obviously Chase is my round 1 pick. Our next team will be the Jets. The Jets, you play the Jags, good matchup. Play the Rams, okay matchup. But then the Bills in the fantasy football championship game, only allowing about 14.8 points per game to opposing receivers. But I will say that honestly, I'm a little bit less concerned about the matchup that you have during the championship game itself in comparison to the first 2 weeks. And then the Rams with Kupp and Puka, it's not horrendous. You do have to go up against the Jets in week 16. You have to go up against the Niners in week 15. The Cardinals matchup is good in the championship week though. And then going over to the Texans, you get a phenomenal matchup against the Ravens for the fantasy football championship, but it should be a tough spot against Miami and KC. And this is another one of those teams in which you have to play the 3 games within a 10-day stretch where I just simply don't know what to do with that. But I really hope I was able to help you out here. And of course, if you wanted to tell me, Mason, you're an idiot, Cedric Tillman is a great receiver, you can go take the higher than 45 net receiving yards over on Underdog Fantasy with a link in the description and comment section. Promo code FLOCK, you're going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you're going to be getting a free Jalen Hurts pick, more than less than half total yard for that Sunday night game. And you're going to be getting a free team review in the live stream we're doing every single night. Just make sure you set up an account on flockfantasy.com with the same email address as your account on Underdog Fantasy. But again, I appreciate you. Really hope I was able to help you out in some way, and really hope we get to see you out with the live stream later tonight.